Welcome to the Gateway, broadcasting live from the Bluffs of the Rockies. We are live on United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. I'm your host this evening, C.L. Thomas. You've been listening to Sean Kelly with Into the Night here on United Public Radio Network 107. I hope everyone is doing good out there. It is a cloudy, rainy evening for me, something I'm very unaccustomed to, and I am fully enjoying it. So I'm really looking forward to snuggling in for tonight and just watching movies and things like that. You don't get to do that in Vegas. It's really rare. So I'm fully enjoying this. I get it. Everyone's telling me that I'm going to be over it pretty quick once the wintertime hits. But guess what? Next week I close on the house. No, it's this week. It's actually on Thursday at 8 o'clock. I close on my house, and it has wood fireplaces throughout it, and I'm just so excited. So stay tuned. It's a really old house, and it sits right on the old Oregon Trail, and it's got just a lot of neat things around it and things. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what I dig up around the property and things like that. So stay tuned. The Civil War left behind more than battlefields, monuments, and stories in our history books. For me, I've lived on the front line of the Battle of Nashville for a number of years and experienced the most crazy haunting that I've ever experienced in my life. My book, Dancing with Demons, is about that haunting. But we did a lot of research. The house sat right on the Battle of Nashville, and I was able to dig up Civil War bullets and cannonballs and all sorts of other things. But it's believed that these kinds of places that are touched by war are home to stories of really strange encounters, unexplained activity, and spirits that, according to legend, never quite left, right? There's always haunted battlefields. Like, look at Gettysburg. People can't get enough of Gettysburg. They are always going out there for the ghosts and things. So, my guest tonight, we're kind of exploring the darker side of Civil War history with author and historian and tour guide, paranormal researcher Courtney Mcinvale, author of Civil War Ghost of Connecticut. And this is something I haven't really thought about. Civil War, and this is why I'm so excited to have her on the show. When you think of the Civil War, you typically think of the Mason-Dixie line, right? And Gettysburg and the South, of course. Courtney is going to take us beyond familiar stories of generals and battlefields and the lives of ordinary soldiers, civilians, and communities whose experiences were forever changed by the war. We'll talk about historical research behind her book, the ghosts, stories that have survived through the generations, the rise of spiritualism during the Civil War era, which I just love that whole thing. I'm going to let her talk about all of that, and some of the unexplained encounters connected to these historic locations. Another thing about Courtney, which I hope she gets into, is she's also a tour guide. She does a lot of tours. So let me get her on here. Courtney, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy that you're on. I have so many questions for you, and I'm excited about the topic.
Oh, perfect. Me too. I love nothing more than talking about history and mystery, as I always like to say.
Yes. So I have to ask. You just got back from the Lincoln House in Springfield, right?
Yeah, yeah.
How was that? I was up there a couple last summer actually.
So it's so funny. I just happened to be near it for a different trip I was on, and I was like, oh my gosh, I do all this Civil War stuff, and I've never visited Abraham Lincoln's grave or where he lived, and it's 30 minutes away from where I am. So I popped down there and I went to the grave first, and of course it was beautiful, and the way they sort of have the music and the flags playing around his tomb makes you feel like you kind of stepped back in time, and it was just sort of this perpetual funeral. I felt a little bit funny about it because I talk about Lincoln and his spiritualism and and how much he feels in his lifetime before he dies and how he predicts his own death. So I felt like strange to be near him in that way. But I also felt, because even though I'm from Connecticut, I've written about Connecticut and Georgia, all of my ancestry as far as the Civil War is Southern. And so all my ancestors were on the Confederate side of the war. So I also felt in there like a sense of them being like, what are you doing? Like, why are we visiting him? And I was like, we'll be quick, right? So I sort of almost felt like this pull to him, but also maybe this like familial bloodline pull away. And then I went to the house and I felt like, even though no one was in the house, there were people watching from the house.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really funny is you can sort of stand kitty corner from it, and where like they used to photograph it, and they photographed it during the whole funeral process. And it just is exactly the same, and it carries that energy. It was just really neat.
That is really neat. Now, Abraham Lincoln's wife was very heavy into spiritualism. In fact, there's a painting in Lilydale in the hotel right now that was precipitated by the spirit that is Lincoln's. It's an actual painting of Lincoln, and it's connected to Mary Todd.
Yeah, Mary Todd is fascinating. She's also controversial.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty interesting. I know she was actually a member of the spiritualist community up in Lilydale.
Yes. And so there's this really famous picture that I'm sure a lot of folks have seen in varying museums or websites, where it's Mary Todd sort of in her funerary, like mourning attire. And you can see Abraham Lincoln's silhouette behind her. And that was supposed to be an early example of spirit photography. And, that was part of a movement, and she would go to these spiritual photographers, but then they kind of like debunked that as they were using an image of him for that. And I think that's really hard. Mary Todd we have to take her sort of with a grain of salt with her spiritualism, even though it was incredibly influential, because a lot of hers was driven just by grief that absolutely broke her, which is so human and so relatable to us at different times. But it was almost like she was surrounding herself with mediums and portraits and all of these things to prove to herself that there was a reason to keep going on through her depression. But what's fascinating is, at the same time, almost, Queen Victoria is doing this over in England because Prince Albert dies, and she's hosting seances, she's hiring mediums, and we start seeing people wearing all black and how long they have to wear all black. And so in America, we have the Lincolns heavily influence what we do when someone dies. And in England, we have that. And then the whole Victorian era is really birthed from this whole mourning process. So it really is unique, but it's a big deal. Like Julia Grant, Ulysses S. Grant's wife, and I love him. He's like one of my historic crushes. But his wife and Mary Todd did not get along. They both were spiritualists, but they like beefed. There was like lady gossip of the 1860s, right? But she had a vision that Ulysses S. Grant was supposed to be shot at the same time Lincoln was. Julia did. And she was like, you're not going to that theater with them. We're not going. And he was like, we can't keep turning down invitations because you don't like his wife. We keep doing that, and she was like, no, it's not it this time. It's not just because I don't like her. It's because I think you're going to die. And of course, he comes up with an excuse, and he tells the president, Julia and I have to go see the kids. I'm so sorry we can't make it. And then, turns out in that whole assassination plot, he was supposed to be killed as well. And, there's some more where he sort of writes in his memoirs, and Julia does too, that that she has these psychic inclinations, and they come up during the Victorian era. So it's really kind of cool,
Kind of cool, but tragic.
It's cool, but tragic. But I kind of like that we start to see this talk of the metaphysical and everyday people starting to figure out what their intuition meant to them. And in a strange way, with Mary Todd and Julia being great examples, and Queen Victoria, this spiritualism rise gave birth to a role for women in a society where they really didn't have one. A woman's intuition suddenly had names and purposes and connections with emotions, and they were able to actually make money by going to do readings and things for folks. And so it kind of was weirdly this progressive thing for women of the era too.
It's so interesting. We could talk all night just on that topic.
Right. We could. Harriet Beecher Stowe, she held seances and invited Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, and he was very skeptical of it. But then he would write in his journals, "I don't know how to explain what I saw at her house," and that was in Connecticut, and I love that. But she would always talk about how men are just so difficult to see beyond their own nose, and but he did say he saw it. He just didn't want to tell her to her face. So it's all really interesting time period.
It is interesting. Nathaniel Hawthorne too was very much into.
Oh, I adore him. Yes, he was, and he would talk about. And I always laugh. So he lived in Concord, Massachusetts for a while, and he talked about how he would wear these like silk robes around the house, which I'm always like, okay, thanks for telling us, And he was like a pretty boy, like a pretty gothic boy. And on a funny note, I was always told that when people went to his house, you would see him walking out the back door when he saw them coming to the front because he was so antisocial. But he would talk about how the ghosts are always touching his robes and moving his dishes. And he wrote a story about how he helped to find a corpse in Concord, and how finding this woman who committed suicide really like sort of changed his whole perspective on death and made him believe in an afterlife he hadn't previously. He was sort of averse to it because he was descended from the Salem witch trial Judge Hawthorne, who was not a good guy, and he had really wanted to separate himself from that, having grown up in Salem. But life just sort of happened to him, and he became spiritual too, like the brother that Edgar Allan Poe never had.
Interesting story. So I went to the Wayside House up in Concord, Mass.
Yes.
I was up there doing it was a dissertation on Hawthorne in Maritime, actually, a completely different subject. And
I love that.
I was filming throughout the house. I had permission to be on the property. I was filming on the house, and nobody was on the property, of course. And, I caught an image, and I'll dig it out and post it later. It's the first ghost image I ever caught. And it looks like you just said he walked around in a robe. It looks like Hawthorne in a robe. I mean, you could see the ring on his finger. He had like a thing dangling from his wrist. Apparently, when I showed the image to a historian at the house, she said, "Oh, that used to be something that hung off his sleeve where he would wipe his pens." And
that makes sense.
Looks so costumey. So what you just said, it just another.
Yeah, he was. It was funny. Like he dressed. He was very introverted, but he dressed really pretty. And he had his wife too, but she was more of the social one. But people would write that they would see him in the street and they would stop and just look at him because they thought he was so handsome and dressed so well, but he would refuse to speak to them. So it's just so funny that he was so presentable yet so like socially like awkward. He's fascinating, but yeah, he's a cool guy, and it sounds like you maybe got an image of him on camera.
I'll post that later, and then you can check it out. And
yeah, I want to see that for sure.
But anyways, Connecticut has a fascinating Civil War history that many people probably don't even realize. I don't even realize that.
Right?
How did you get into this topic, and what are some of the lesser known stories that you've uncovered that surprised you the most?
Yeah, so it's funny. When I went to write about the Civil War, it was after I'd written about the Revolutionary War, which in New England is very heavy. That is where a lot of the Revolutionary War took place. And I grew up not far from where Benedict Arnold grew up. So that sort of just fell into my hands really easily. But I was raised, I mentioned I was part Southern. My dad was from Georgia. He was a history major at UGA. I was raised on Civil War history and him teaching me about my ancestry with that. So when I finished writing about the Revolution, I thought the Civil War would be sort of the next best thing. And my dad had passed, and I thought it would be a good way to connect with him. And I wrote to my publisher at the time, and they were like, Courtney, you kind of have to write about where you currently live, and you currently live in Connecticut. And I was like, well, I don't have any battlefields for the Civil War. And so I started thinking, how can I do this differently? And I thought, well, the stories of spirits are all about people. We're so focused, maybe because of mainstream media, and thinking we have to go to a place, a haunted place. But we're all, at the end of the day, just trying to connect with the soul of a person. So I thought, why don't I follow the stories of people from Connecticut of different ages, different ranks, different importance through the war, and follow their story. And did their spirit go home? Is their spirit on a battlefield? And sort of, I followed those stories and tried to bring about some attention to what Connecticut did provide by way of so many men, but also it being the provision state. Samuel Colt supplied most of the rifles that were utilized for the Union Army. And he later was found selling rifles to both sides. And then he died of gout in the middle of it all, like weird man. But I got to sort of talk about him and visit his grave and his strange paranormal connections. Harriet Beecher Stowe, like I mentioned, Mark Twain, who published Ulysses S. Grant's memoir. So all those people of fame, but then generals and soldiers. And I think one of the soldiers that stood out to me the most was a general, Mansfield, and he was the oldest general in the Civil War, and he dies in Antietam. But I went to Antietam first before I went to his home in Connecticut, which is weird. I don't know. I travel a lot. So I went to Antietam, and I went to the spot where he died. And there's usually an upside down sort of cannon, or like sort of a monument with different cannonballs, which will mark where someone's mortally wounded or dies. And I brought all my little ghost hunty devices or whatever. And I asked, while I had a spirit box running, from where were you shot? Because I was trying to ascertain where the battle lines were. Like, I like to visualize in my head where was Union and Confederate. And this voice came on the spirit box, intelligently answered, which I don't always expect, and said, from your left. And I looked, and I could see that there was a wood line there. And I had read that the Confederates were really good at sort of guerrilla warfare, and they would hide in the wood lines. And so I figured that made sense. And then I went to his home a few weeks later, and it's part of the historical society for that county, Middlesex County. And they let me read the letters that were sent home to his wife when he died. I felt so funny, like holding them in my hands, like this, and all of the soldiers recorded that his last words were from your left, that he was trying to tell them that's where they were coming from. And I did not know that when I heard that voice at the Antietam battlefield in Sharpsburg. And so for me, that was just like this, wow. If it wasn't an intelligent answer at the right time, then at the very least, there's this energy residing there from General Mansfield's death at that spot, and that moment is replaying in time. And that just sort of showed me that this human spirit can almost be in multiple places. And being forced to write about Connecticut from that perspective was incredibly helpful in me learning that.
Do you ever feel like a personal connection with spirits such as that, just from your history, your family history and background?
Oh, yeah, I do. And sometimes I feel that mostly when I go to certain areas and I feel really sad. And I feel like overcome by a certain emotion. I feel like I have this, I don't know, desire or compulsion to say, like, I'm here to help you. I want to help you. And I almost sometimes I'm like, do you can come along for the ride if you're going back to Connecticut or Georgia or where, whatever you need. And everyone's like, don't say that, you'll get attachments. I'm like, I don't see it like that. I just feel this very human sort of connection. I'm not trying to, remove someone from where they want to be. But if there's the idea of someone being lost out there that never made it home, then I have this desire to help that. And one of the things that tugged at my heartstrings the most when I was researching everything is that soldiers, remember, most of them are 18, 19, 20 years old. So really they're boys. They weren't afraid to die, even at that young age. They were afraid of not being brought back home and of being forgotten. And so one of the greatest tragedies and things that I had to sort of make peace with when I was researching this part of history is that most of these boys weren't brought back home. Most of them were buried in a cemetery that was made somewhere near the battlefield when their corpse was picked up days, weeks, months later, not anywhere near where they lived. And if you were to go around and ask people in the year 2026 many questions about who was in the Civil War and what they were doing, most people couldn't answer. So I'm like, you didn't get home and you were forgotten. And so I felt like this small mission of mine was to make sure they were remembered as much as possible and that they mattered. And so now when I go out to a battlefield or a cemetery, I say, you matter, you're remembered, and you're loved, just so that they know that, hopefully somewhere on the other side.
There is a Civil War cemetery in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and
that's right by me right now.
There's a soldier buried there, a young boy, like you said, and he died in battle, of course. And his family actually must have visited the grave and put Georgian soil around his grave. So I guess they must have excavated the dirt that was originally buried there and then put Georgia soil over him because they couldn't bring him back.
I love that. And I actually have an ancestor buried in Chattanooga who died, who was sick, and he's in the Confederate cemetery. And his stone is like fallen and everything, but we have this old family journal entry where they document, going to the funeral and the wife standing there and the daughter. And it's just so sad, but being able to at least have the family there is so important. A lot of these guys didn't have that. So I try to, make some peace with that. Is at least they had someone, and they had someone bring them dirt. And what's really funny is a lot of the ghost stories that the Civil War soldiers wrote about also had to do with this sense of being brought back home. One of the most profound ghost stories I ever read from a soldier was from a soldier from Michigan who was fighting in the Battle of Atlanta. And he was with his childhood best friend. They were in the same regiment, the same company. They were fighting all day. His friend didn't come back to the encampment at night, which wasn't necessarily unusual because fighting could go into the night depending on what happened. But he did think it was getting rather late when suddenly the tents unfurled and his friend was there looking really dirty, looking not great, and sort of summoned him out of the tent. He followed his friend down to a small creek. Atlanta isn't like it is now, so there were creeks and trees. And his friend pointed to a bush next to that creek, and he could see feet sticking out from under the bush.
Oh, no.
And his friend pointed, help me get this guy out of here. But he pulled the feet, and he looked at the body, and it was his friend who had walked him there. And he looked up, and his friend was gone. And this man, I get chills every time I say it, he goes on to become a scientist because he wants to prove or disprove an afterlife. And he spends the rest of his life trying to prove or disprove that event. And on his deathbed, he says, I know there's an afterlife because I know I saw him that day. And, he wanted his body brought back home to Michigan, and his friend made sure he did that. So there's a lot of things like that. Another story of a man lost his son on the Confederate side in Resaca, Georgia. And he woke up and his son was by his bedside, saying that he wanted to be found. And he had gone out there and couldn't find him. And then he woke up and his son was there again and said, the Yankees put me under a pokeberry bush. He went out, found the pokeberry bush, found his son, brought him back home, and then he didn't see his son's ghost again. So this kind of shows me this desire to be near family was carried into the afterlife, and I just find that so intriguing.
That is so intriguing. And all of this is in your book, right?
So the Civil War Ghost of Georgia will have those Atlanta stories. Some of the Connecticut ones about General Mansfield is in the Civil War Ghost of Connecticut. So yeah, they are in the books. Yes.
So people really don't realize just how affected places like Connecticut were from the Civil War. The whole country was in an uproar over this thing. But I think there's a misconception that just because it wasn't fought in your own backyard, like it was in the South, certainly, that was, in your face kind of. But
Right.
how was it affecting people in Connecticut?
Oh, it affected them deeply. I mean, our country was still really small. We weren't what we are now. We were a little bit bigger than 13 colonies, but we weren't big. And we didn't have a huge population. And when we're looking at a small population in a small area, you have to remember the Union had a lot more soldiers than the Confederacy. We had almost 2 million Union soldiers. So it was impossible for there not to be a Union household that wasn't affected in one way, shape, or form. And Connecticut, being a small state, had over 5,000 soldiers. Sometimes people account for a lot more. So that's huge, right? And, that at least died or were injured during that time. And so you have all these households that are being affected, and you have Connecticut soldiers are involved in the worst battles. Antietam is heavy on Connecticut soldiers. They had the youngest and most catastrophic death in Antietam of a regiment of almost entirely 18-year-old boys. And it was recorded that when they were dying, they were all asking for their mothers, which breaks my heart. But then you have Gettysburg. One of the biggest days of Gettysburg is almost entirely Connecticut soldiers. And we actually have a museum in Connecticut called the New England Civil War Museum that talks a lot about how greatly these Connecticut regiments were impacted. But you also have monetarily a lot of money going into the weapons that are being provided from Connecticut. It's supplying 80% of the ammunition. It's supplying 70% of the weaponry. So all these resources are being poured out of Connecticut. All the women are making all of the clothes to send to the soldiers. So you're having people that are suffering economically at home while worrying about the thousands of boys that are away. And what's funny is the Union was quick to forget after they won. Everyone's like, we won, we don't have to think about it. But it was incredibly impactful, and a lot of people lost lives and probably wanted to be like, it was for something, we can't forget for what. And I think that one of the travesties of the modern era is that people up north don't think about it anymore.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
Do you find that the paranormal stories surrounding the everyday soldiers can be somewhat more compelling than those surrounding the famous historical figures?
Yes and no. I think, and I say that almost from reading it from the soldiers' perspective, because a lot of the soldiers who were more of like foot soldiers, a lot of times their stuff wasn't documented. Because they couldn't read or write. A lot of times, too, you would find that if they did survive, they would marry a girl who read or wrote, and she would write. My husband doesn't read or write, and they would sometimes have letters that were barely put together trying to court a girl that they would send home, and they're really adorable, and I love reading those letters, but they really couldn't. So we don't get as much firsthand accounts from the foot soldiers, but we do see some of their beliefs and superstitions. And there's a Civil War ghost story from Gettysburg, from the little guys. They are from the 20th Maine, and they are ascending Little Round Top, and they're supposed to sort of push down this big infiltration of the Confederates coming up the hill. And they say when they're being put up to Little Round Top, they said to their commanding officers, the general is bringing us. And he was like, General, me, General whatever. And they said, no, General Washington. And they swore they saw the specter of George Washington on his horse, helping them at the Battle of Gettysburg, of course, nearly a century after his war and his death. But they swore it, that they felt that and that they saw him. And on the flip side, when you get to Pickett's charge the next day, you have the Confederates swearing that they see General Stonewall Jackson, who had died months prior after the Battle of Chancellorsville. And they swear they see him wearing a Union uniform as if to warn them not to approach that Union line. But Robert E. Lee really believed that this was the thing to do, and they had to sort of follow that to their death, even though they saw the ghost of Stonewall Jackson almost pushing them back. And so for some of the little guys, seeing the ghost of the big guys was meaningful, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you, you've obviously heard a ton of different Civil War stories, both in written and oral. How do you distinguish between a documented historical account and maybe like a local legend? Because there's a lot of local legends. At least that's what I found around the South.
Like there are. And it's hard. You don't want to fully dismiss anything because oral tradition is incredibly powerful. And we wouldn't, and as a historian, I know this, like we wouldn't know anything about Viking culture if we didn't have, oral tradition that was passed down through these Norse communities about what their beliefs were and how they operated, because they didn't write down anything that we could understand. So that's one thing. But then another thing is oral tradition can grow really, really rapidly and get really, really twisted. So it's difficult. For me, I like primary sources as much as I can from the soldiers or from newspapers at the time that were getting reports from the people at that time. I put the most stock in those ghost stories, but I never want to dismiss oral tradition. And in fact, where I am in Chickamauga, Georgia right now is defined by a folklore that is part of oral tradition. The town is known for it. We have a festival for it. So one of my employees, he started a festival for it a couple of years ago. He's fabulous. He's into cryptids and all of that lore, kind of like Mothman, but we have Green Eyes. And Green Eyes is controversial in its origin. Some people believe it's Cherokee, that it predates the Civil War. And people say, well, it's Cherokee oral tradition. And it could or couldn't be, because a lot of the folks that live in North Georgia are of Cherokee descent. Did it get twisted? I don't know. That's also entirely possible, because a lot of the Cherokee were marched out on the Trail of Tears. So we don't know fully. But then there's stories that Green Eyes came during the Civil War, that he was a Civil War soldier that died, that he fed off of the souls of the Civil War soldiers. And these are all famous stories that different locals will tell you and they believe. And so that belief, in a sense, makes it real. I don't find any documentation of a Green Eyes until the 1960s. And we find that documentation, according to the National Park Service. There was a park ranger that worked there at the time, had heard a story of a similar cryptid in Germany where he had served in World War II. So when he has a job as a park ranger, he sort of uses it as a cautionary, scary legend to keep kids out of the park and climbing monuments at night. And then the story sort of gets carried on in perpetuity and becomes huge. Whatever it is now, it is real to the community. And there are several unexplained things that people liken to Green Eyes. So I always say it doesn't make it less real. It just makes it more of what have we made with the power of the human mind versus an actual historic event or spirit. Because my personal belief is most spirits, if you want to call them that, for lack of a better word, are people like me or you. They walked to this earth in human form. They just lived at a different time. And that's it.
Well, one of the legends that I heard a lot around Tennessee is the big black dog kind of thing. Have you heard of
Yes.
anything like that, of soldiers seeing big black dogs or anything like that?
Connecticut actually has one. And the black dog legend almost being like an omen of death or bad things. I never found any soldiers documenting that. Now, did soldiers document dogs? 100%. And half the time, I can barely talk about what they were saying about their dogs because I cry or the audience cries. But there is a troop artillery from Athens, Georgia, who had a little dog that came up to their camp. His name was Charlie, and he followed them throughout the war. He was like the first to cross the river in Antietam. He went to Gettysburg. One of the Dutch ladies complained that the dog was killing all her chickens, and she found all the soldiers eating chicken because he would bring them food and stuff. And she was like, "Those are my chickens." They're like, "You can't prove it's your chickens, and you can't prove our dog did it, right?" And of this entire artillery throughout the war, they lose one person. This dog is almost like their angel.
Oh.
And they write all about him. And then even other regiments tried to steal him, but he always went back to them. Like he was supposed to be with them. And then at the end, in the siege of Petersburg, when it's not even really the battle, there's just some shots being fired out. Charlie's laying by a tree. He gets hit by shrapnel and he dies. And they wrote a 3-page obituary for him in the paper. They gave him a full funeral with military rites. They had a reunion where they only spoke of Charlie. You can go through battlefields and see other regiments who had Charlies of their own, and they are on top of their monuments. Their names are engraved. So every dog story that I've ever encountered in the war has been one of, this is my angel and my friend. And the black dog legend, oh my gosh, that's nationwide. That's older. That's just one of those things where people say it happens before a really bad thing. The dog appears. And I think people, I don't want to dismiss it, but I think people, just like with Green Eyes, when bad things happen, like here we had the Battle of Chickamauga with a huge amount of death. We had terrible typhoid outbreaks. We had the Trail of Tears. When bad things happen, people want a reason. And it's much easier to point the finger at a supernatural being that nobody can control than to figure out what's actually going on with us as people. And that's philosophical, I know, but that's true.
I try not to follow any dog stories because I have a dog. I lost a dog, and
Same. It's very much the same. Yeah. And I hate doing it, but I have to. And then I've now talked about Charlie so much. I've like built some inner strength inside of me, but it's really hard when I'm in front of a very big audience and the Charlie slide comes up and there's a little sketch of him. And then I look at everyone, I'm like, please don't cry and then I'm going to cry and we have to get through this story. But it's really sweet. And I love that human animal connection stands the test of time.
Were there any locations or investigations connected to the book where you personally experienced something that you couldn't easily explain?
I'm trying to think. I want to say yes. So this was more in it was for both books because I had gone there's this area of Northern Virginia where there was the Battle of the Wilderness, the Battle of Chancellorsville, and the Battle of Spotsylvania. And these 3 battles essentially overlapped each other over a period of 1 year, to the point where, like, when Spotsylvania occurs, they're documenting that they're walking over the bodies from the people from Wilderness that they had left there before, and that's really hard on those guys to be back in that same area. And that area is dark, the darkest battlefield energy I've ever been on. But when I was walking through there, I could feel someone walking behind me. And the only other time that I had that really spookily happen was in Gettysburg. And this was by an area called Iverson's Pits. Have you ever heard of that?
I haven't.
So it's one of the first, if not the first, documented ghost story of Gettysburg. On the first day of Gettysburg, there's this Georgia boy who's in charge of, a regiment of North Carolinians. The Georgia boy he's born with a silver spoon. He's not very well liked, but he's upset because his wife died and he's really drunk and he's not caring about his men at all. He sends them into this sort of firing line by the Union, and hundreds of them get basically mowed down in a matter of minutes. And they fall into these pits. And Iverson, he has a fall from grace. He gets sent back down to Georgia, and, he tries to recover his reputation a little. But the farmer that owned that land where all those men were shot starts claiming as soon as the battle ends that he sees a line of men stand up and get shot down every night at sunset in his field. And for years and years, people would document this. So I, of course, when I'm visiting Gettysburg, have to go check out Iverson's Pits at sunset and after dark. And I'm there after dark when I'm not someone who claims to see like full-bodied apparitions all the time, just waltzing about, but I saw a man standing in the dark looking at me, and I thought it could have been another visitor. And so I don't get arrested by the parks. This was before they changed their schedule. This was pre-COVID years. We were free. So we had freedoms. And so I was there and I saw this guy look at me almost with this deer in headlights look. And I looked at him the same, like we had startled each other. And then I noticed he's kind of in a uniform and it's dark and he has dark hair and dark eyes. And I just felt wildly uncomfortable. And so I sort of hasten away pretty quickly and he follows me. And then when we get in the car, you know how like the cars now, like I used to drive old beat up cars, but I had a rental car. You know how like the cars will tell you when something's like next to you that like, it's like, oh, hey, you're going to hit something, like whatever. We're leaving and the thing starts like blinking and I could see him still out the window as we're driving away. The indicator is still saying that he's there. So flash forward to me writing about the Civil War ghost of Georgia. I write about Iverson's Pits. I write about what happens to him in Macon when he goes home. And I'm like, I need to find a picture of this man for the book. So I start looking through Library of Congress for pictures and I find one and I look at it. I'm like, I've seen this man before. And I was like, oh my word, that's the man I saw at Iverson's Pits, but I didn't know that was him. And to me, that really opened up this whole theory of, is the paranormal just dead people that know they're dead? Or is this a time thing where we are like creating this, able to like bridge this weird rift in time? And it really opened up that concept for me because at that moment, I know I saw him and he saw me. And I'm sure that was weird for him to see a lady walking around in like jeans, like around his little battle site. And I'm like, what's this guy doing, at night? So for me, that created that idea in my head that I've never lost since then and have more deep dove into this.
It would be
experiences in time are our paranormal sensations.
It'd be interesting to go back in time to see if, how like sometimes, you kind of see something out of the corner of your eye or something like that, and you don't know what it is. Like, yes. I know this has happened to people, or you have like a deja vu or something like that. It'd be interesting if in his lifetime, if he had that blip of maybe he saw something, you know what I mean? But, it would be so interesting if there was an overlap like that, like a time or something.
Right. And I think about that, and I think of how, he went back to, and I don't know if this was a connection because I came from poor middle Georgia people. He was rich middle Georgia people, but he went back to Macon, which is where my family is from. And he's part of General Stoneman, the raid to capture General Stoneman in Macon. If you've ever heard the song "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down," it's written about that raid, and he helps capture General Stoneman, and that's sort of his comeuppance for the Confederacy that he assisted in that. But that happened in the area where my family was living at that time. And so I also wonder, is there an ancestral tie? Is there something that connected me to be able to see him in that moment? I don't know. Maybe that's too deep, but it is weird to think about.
Well, there's got to be some kind of connection with you anyhow, with just from your family background and how you are so connected with the individual stories.
Right.
I really do feel like you have there's some kind of connection there.
I always tell people it is my honor, and probably in this crazy world in which we live, the one thing that keeps me doing what I'm doing is feeling like I'm at least honoring the past and sharing stories of the people who came before us.
There's one thing that I kind of left off. I wanted to ask you, and I didn't quite get to it. In your book, you explore like the Irish and Black regiments in the abolitionist movement. How does including those perspectives change the way we understand Connecticut's Civil War history and its hauntings?
Right. So Connecticut and Massachusetts both had African American regiments. They called them colored regiments at the time. I'm not saying that to be any sort of way. That was their official name. And they usually came in later on in the war, because everyone thought the war was going to end. It didn't. You're not getting volunteers anymore. People are being forced to fight. And so one of the things they did was sort of rely on African American folks who were still in a position to almost be told what to do and not volunteer in the same way, to go and do that. And I think that shows how the North was ahead of its time, but also not. And that gets into a very political take on the Civil War, but factually that is true. And these guys do go out there and they get put up against not just Confederates, but against some of their fellow Union soldiers who don't want to be with them. And so I think this shows this really deep perspective on race inequality in the North when we put those guys into a battle scene, and they're not seen as equals or heroes with their fellow guys at that time, even though they are trained and they're doing as much, if not more, to prove themselves. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't like to talk about, but needs to be talked about. I also learned that General Sherman, who's kind of a Union hero, right? Like he's like the Voldemort of the South, but for the Union, he's a hero, right? So I always look around when I say Sherman in Georgia, like some like bolt of lightning is going to come and get me. I'm like, I didn't say I liked him, but he famously, even though he came up with 40 acres and a mule, that was to get African American folks out of his hair, because he actually was burning bridges and letting them drown so they wouldn't follow the camp. And he's Union, right? So I think, even though we had these colored regiments and they were supposed to be out there and they think we're fighting for us, right? These guys are on our side. It really showed that it had a long way to go.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's how it was.
Yeah.
So we're just about out of time, and I wanted to ask you, what are you working on and what do you have coming up? And tell me about the Booze Brews event too.
I'm so excited about that. So right now, I'm currently in Chickamauga, Georgia with Southern Shadows, which is the newer branch of our tour company. And we're offering tours 5 nights a week down here. Our Haunted Hearted Chickamauga tours. You're either with me or with Nate, who he's our green eyes encrypted expert. So you're in good hands with either of us. And same Seaside Shadows is up in Mystic, Connecticut and Westerly, Rhode Island. And we run downtown Mystic tours, graveyard tours, pub crawls, all sorts of things, Halloween time investigations. And so you can check out our websites for those. I am debating which Civil War state to write about next. I did a North, I did a South, I did both sides of my family. Everyone is telling me to do a split state. And because I go to Maryland a lot, they're on my radar. But I'm also, I have this weird affection for a bunch of Texas soldiers, so they might be next anyway. I don't know. I have to go with my heart. But coming up next spring, I'm so excited about this. Booze, Brews, and Barbecue, which is this wonderful TV show and creative project run by John Ty and Barry, who have been on your show before. They have been working closely with me about Chickamauga, Georgia, the haunted history here, the locations. And we're going to be running an event, and Southern Shadows and I are going to be taking care of your ghosty business here in late April, which is called, again, Congress of Spirits. It's going to have food. It's going to have ghost stuff for people, live music from really great bands. And it's going to be like a 3 or 4 day event next spring. And so I am just so excited to welcome them into our little battlefield community in the Deep South and introduce them to our ghosts, and then introduce the community to amazing food and music and people.
Courtney, it sounds so amazing. I can't wait to be a part of this event.
Oh, I'm so excited you're going to be here.
Hey, listen, you have been such a wealth of information. Thank you so much for being on the show. Real quick, can you promote your books? And
yeah. So you can get them on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, CourtneyMcinvale.com, whatever you want. You can come into my shop and come see me, and I'll sign it for you if I'm here. If I'm not here, I'm at a concert, so just leave me a note and I'll sign it for you. But that's totally works if you want any of the books.
What kind of shop do you own?
So pretty much it is books. I have a research library behind me. We have a little Green Eyes museum, and it's just a nice little place for us to meet up with our ghost tour. And we have spooky candles and T-shirts and fun things like that.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for being on the air.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to the Gateway Podcast, broadcast live from United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. My guest tonight, Courtney Mcinvale, with her book, Civil War Ghost in Connecticut. She's got several books out there. Please look her up. She's a great and enthusiastic historian. She's so knowledgeable about everything she writes about. I just love her. I just wanted to give a special shout out to all of the crew at 107.7 FM New Orleans who make this show happen. And thank you all. If you are listening to the Gateway Podcast for the first time and you haven't done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, leave a review, or share it. You can also do that on the website at UPRN. Share with a fellow traveler of the strange and unexplained. And until next time, stay curious.